One of my pet peeves when it comes to the study and engagement of philosophy is the article, the episode, the speech, the chapter in a book that spends all of its time trying to convince you that you should, quote, do philosophy or study philosophical works without instead interjecting or introducing the idea that they're arguing in the first place. It seems like the author is bogged down in trying to justify why somebody should consider what they think about instead of attempting to insert or assert or argue for what they believe to be right and true and good. And this episode is an example of attempting to break out of that because it is so easy to fall into that trap of trying to simply justify that you have something important to say instead of just coming out and saying it. And the episode that we are going to address today is one that is not only near and dear to my heart in the sense that I have witnessed its practical effects in first person in my own life, but also that I believe we are witnessing so many different ideologies collapse under its truth. And that is that if you are going to face the darkness, you must carry the light. The struggle between the physical and the spiritual, the conflict between right and wrong, is itself rooted in a worldview. We might talk about this in different ways or at different times, but there has been a sort of paradigm of sorts that has long been standing as the series of assumed beliefs that bring about our, say, collective experience. To make that a little bit more simple, or to even address that from a different angle, for the majority of most of our lives, we have lived in a period where we assumed certain things to be true, whether or not we were, say, conscious in adopting them. This is not as damning as it may come across, because it's really, if you were to look at the structure of scientific revolutions by someone like Thomas Kuhn, the way that people tend to work. We don't challenge everything all of the time as much as our pundits and our pseudo-philosophers like to say. We don't challenge every hierarchy or every truth at any given moment because that would just collapse into absurdism. Rather, we all begin with some sorts of assumed beliefs. And while we are not even at the tail end, we are post global war on terror, or at least that's how it's being presented. It might come across in public. What we witnessed and saw over the last, say, 25 years is that those who go into war without some form of moral foundation are so much more prone to the effects of something like PTSD. And so the intent, what do I want to accomplish with this? What do I want to, if I were to say, if I'm going to equip you with something akin to armor, mental armor, maybe in another, to be more specific, spiritual armor against the darkness of the world that we face, it would be this, that if you are going to go against the darkness, if you are going to fight the demons, and you have no firm foundation to stand on, then you should not be surprised when you suffer the consequences. Now, this episode is an example of something that I would consider not necessarily a passion project, but at the core of my own writing, and it is a component in regards to what we do here at Redacted. It's not good enough for us to simply go about and equip our physical parts or our mental parts or bits and pieces that way, but we want to address what we believe to be right and true and good. And somehow, well, not somehow, and thankfully, we have taken on a sponsor, and that is Obsidian Arms. And now, if you are in the business of maintaining your own equipment or even protecting and gunsmithing other people's stuff, you might want to look at Obsidian Arms because they have a series of punch and toolkits that has just expanded that might actually serve your needs better than what you have on your tool bench. They also come with a lifetime warranty, so if you are to wear one out or damage it in any way, that you can send that tool back into Obsidian Arms and they'll replace it. No cost to you. In addition to that, they bring about, or they have a series of parts that might be the solution to challenges that you're facing in the field. Something like a firing pin that has a unique property, or you're looking to bring something to market and you're looking for a way to have it made in America, truly fitting the spirit of American ingenuity. So if you want to do that, go over to Obsidian Arms at obsidianarms.com. And if you want to percentage off your order, go ahead and check the link below, as that is standard operating procedure. I'm going to begin with, again, tearing into something that I want to call pop philosophy. There is a term for pop psychology where you have the true psychologist criticizing these people who perform pop psychology. And if I were to do the same thing in this framework without trying to avoid as much of the snootiness as possible, it would be that this idea of mindfulness really is pop philosophy. It's to meditate on something is a very odd way of trying to induce the experiences of faith or belief or something greater than you to be true. And it also tries to borrow from things, oftentimes without admitting what it's trying to take. So pop philosophy, I'm going to break it into roughly 3 categories. You have the Gnostics, you have the Nihilists, and you have the Idolaters. Now, the Gnostics is a term that has been resurging in our environment, and it oftentimes is attributed to something like New Age spiritualism, or an entirely different angle, conspiracy theories. Now, there is a crossover between those two, but the principal idea, the principal defining element of Gnosticism as a pop philosophy is that it attributes something to secret knowledge. That if you just believe the thing, whether it's if you just read the tea leaves or you have the experience, then it must introduce some sort of truth to you. That truth itself, some hidden truth, the secret knowledge about the Illuminati or the this family or the theys in the brackets or just the way that life is, that we are all gods in some sense. This New Age element or the conspiracy element, which I do believe, again, overlap rather distinctly, this belief system is focused on some sort of secret knowledge, some sort of secret hidden truth that is some secret hidden truth that pulls the wool off your eyes, for a lack of better metaphor, that the person lives in this world, the worldview that they have, where everybody else are sheep being controlled by something else. They're just going about the motions. And this can take form in different examples, sometimes like religion is the opiate to the masses, or that you just need to understand or speak your truth, or this asceticism of going out into the wilderness and inducing mind-bending experiences in order to understand some sort of secret truth. Or it can oftentimes get social and political, again, with the idea of conspiracy theories. If you want to go deeper into that subject, go back a couple episodes to the one on conspiracy theories as religion, or it has to do with the straw lord theory or the straw lord fallacy that I've been working on. Another example of pop philosophy would be nihilism, and this one is most easily represented in the New Atheist movement, which hasn't completely collapsed, but is certainly on its way out. You can find the skeletal bones of their ideology still in places like Twitter and X, and you can find the nihilists out in the streets who think there is no such thing as right and wrong because, well, whatever their worldview is collapsed underneath them, and they tend to be people who are sort of adolescent in mindset, but are at least not naive. And that is probably the only badge of honor that they carry. See, naivety eventually gives way. Either it transforms into ignorance through maintained naivety, or it turns into nihilism or cynicism, more correctly, when the things that one assumed to be true are not true for the reasons that they understood them to be or assumed them in the past. And so nihilism is a very quick, and I'm again referring to it as adolescent belief system that very quickly latches on to somebody, and it latches on to their need for meaning but struggle to find it. And nihilism can also come across in ideas like there is no truth but power, or might makes right, or even corrupted excessive pragmatism. That as long as we get the outcome we need, as long as it's practical, it must also be good. But nihilism can also come across in the philosophical with the Stoics, where on the surface, Stoicism sounds quite beautiful. This holding one's composure under burdens, and holding oneself together under otherwise emotionally challenging circumstances, and this sort of recognition that the only thing that you can always be in control of is your emotions, as it boils down deeper and deeper and deeper into its worldview, into its metaphysic, can very quickly turn into some sort of deterministic nihilism, that there really is no meaning, that everything will happen the way that it is intended to, and your reaction to it has no meaningful value at all, except for to yourself, which then could even devolve into idolatry, which is the third form of pop philosophy. Sometimes we might come up with the examples of like aesthetic paganism, or you might have the simplest examples of idolatry would be like worshiping the state, which would be the communist, or it would be the worshiping of race, which is the Black Lives Matter activist, or the worshiping of transgenderism, which is the worship of the self, or you could even, in a Christian argument, argue that Islam, Buddhism, and so forth are all forms of idolatry. And that is where we run into pop psychology, or not psychology, pop philosophy, is this oftentimes very shallow, but posing as intelligent arguments back and forth over different things. We'll use an example of a famous Gnostic that recently has been in the, I wouldn't say the cover, but has been kind of going about in not popularity, but in attention, which would be Billy Carson, who talked against, or who was addressed by Wesley Huff, who then challenged Ben Carson's, or Billy Carson? Billy Carson, it's got to be Billy. His sort of Gnostic worldview about how, whatever they're telling you is not really true. Another example, or a common example of the nihilist, would still be the no truth but power guy, or the their life has no meaning, so therefore let's eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. This nihilism was really popular in the 90s, and it kind of bled into the 2000s, but I think some of it is running its course, at least on a popular level, where people are going one way or the other. But nihilism, I think, is the most technical. And then we get into the idolaters, which take whatever is or should be at the top, or whatever is right and true and good, and replaces it with something that is either more convenient or even just simply themselves. And what do all of these have to do with moral injury? What do all these have to do with PTSD? What do they have to do with the consequences that we face in our life, in the decisions that we make, in the hardships and the challenges and the suffering that we endure? It certainly is no surprise, it is no mystery that life itself has hardships, that we are going to face them. If nothing else, the idea of a life that is devoid of hardships oftentimes creates those hardships so as to attempt to find some meaning in its existence. You look at people who have been born into just absolute wealth, or they've been born into what the Black Lives Matter activists would call privilege, or you look at the people who have been growing up in some form of opulence. They oftentimes smash that glass bulb, to refer to Jung, to try to create enough chaos for their life to have meaning and sorting it out. But if you want to take it a step further, if you want to take it a step closer to home, I want to address the issues of the global war on terror and what we observed, or what could be observed from that conflict. This is warfare itself. And that is that the global war on terror, the GWAT in Iraq and Afghanistan, arrived at the heels, or at the end, of the new atheist movement. One might even be able to say that it put it to death. It's possible, because the new atheist idea was this argument, this kind of resurfacing idea that all religion was foolish, and that again was some sort of opiate to the masses, and that if that evolution was clearly the way, or was clearly true, and that religion itself was dogmatic. And the accusations that came from this ideology and this movement were strange and comical, which we'll get into the end, but all ultimately left people, when they were engaging in these things, without the mechanism by which to handle the hardship that they faced. Sure, you had some people, you had soldiers or men who were physically fit, mentally awake, and were they morally correct? This is where we're going to run into the problem. You'd see this reflected in creeds, oddly enough, where you would say that I'll always endeavor to keep myself more physically fit, more mentally straight, and morally awake. No, that's not the way of saying it. But you'll see this in the creeds of various military positions. You'll see this in whether or not it's the Soldier's Creed or so on and so forth, where there would be this call to moralism, but then ultimately when people would encounter genuine evil in the world, they would suffer some form of PTSD, either directly or indirectly, when they returned to the United States, only to be sort of treated like it didn't matter, or they didn't matter, or the challenges that they faced were just illusionary, and then they were treated as if they were broken, not because of the harsh evil that they observed, or maybe were party to, or maybe were victims of, and then they had no means by which to evaluate it. And moral injury implies that there is a moral system, a hierarchy, or at least a paradigm. Now, we've talked about paradigms before. A paradigm is a series of assumed worldview foundations. It's a series of premises that are assumed, or sort of generally accepted, which serve as the foundation for a current period of time's beliefs on a certain topic. Thomas Kuhn, again, famously writes about it in his book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, where he gives us the foundation by which you and I would hear, or you later use the phrase, a paradigm shift. A paradigm shift comes from the writing of Thomas Kuhn. We are referring to paradigms as moral paradigms, as what I think is the simplest form, or the least committal form of moral foundation that a person can engage with. But this is also where we get many of the stories that we may read or watch, or again, play in video games, or maybe even try to see as true in our own lives, where the ways that we were taught just turned out not to be true. The sort of equilibrium matrix, paradigm shift as storyline movie, which again, we might try to manifest in some sort of sense into our own lives, is represented in this example. But without a moral framework, without some form of a moral framework, a person is more susceptible to PTSD, particularly the moral injury side of it. Now, there are multiple ways that we can approach moral injury, but the two most common ones and the two most direct ones would be the witnessing of something that one believes that they are responsible for preventing. Or that they witness something, there's a tragedy of some sorts where there's a loss, and that the individual believes that they're somewhat responsible for it. This might come across as survivor's guilt. Example, your platoon goes out on a mission, somebody gets killed, you believe that you should have been there instead of him, therefore the survivor's guilt. And the other example of it is something that we've seen in the other example of moral injury is the participation in something that is evil, even when one does not really hold on to, it's the participation in something that is evil by peer pressure. Let's just use peer pressure as the terminology. So we've got survivor's guilt as one form of moral injury and peer pressure as the other form of moral injury. Peer pressure can also come across as doing what I had to do even though I knew it was wrong in order to survive. Now, why do these two very forward or front or basic examples of moral injury, what do they have to do with a moral framework? Well, if you do not have a framework by which you evaluate morality, or you do not believe that there is any, say, system or hierarchy even deeper than a paradigm, by which morality is determined, then you have no means by which to consider something to be evil and or tragic. This oftentimes creates a contradiction in somebody's mind when they point out something as being evil while simultaneously denying that there is any system, there's any framework by which morality is determined. They're saying that there is no truth but power, but I myself am a victim. How can it possibly be true that you're a victim and there's some moral weight applied to that title or that position without there being some mechanism by which the morality of being a victim is considered immoral, or being victimized, let's say, is considered immoral? See, this is where that contradiction arises. In the individual who goes off to war, we're going to use this as a very straightforward example. When he goes off to war, if he believes that there is no such thing as right or wrong, how then can he justify the feeling of remorse for loss? It simply is the way that it is, the way of the jungle, the way of the tribe, the way of the experience. It just is what it is. How can he claim that his leadership made mistakes, that his leadership was bad leadership or even poorly acting leadership by any other mechanism other than pragmatism, which doesn't appeal to the loss of of life, but only appeals to the success or lack thereof of the mission? So, moral injury, the framework of moral injury must exist within a framework that is morality, that some sort of moral system. But if it tries to deny it, if the individual tries to deny that there is any moral framework, then he or she is going to suffer some form of moral injury, likely in the form of dissonance between what they are saying and claiming to be true and what they are experiencing to be true. There is truth outside of what we can cognate, or at least this is an appeal. The existence of tragedy and moral injury is an appeal to the existence of something greater than or beyond the physical. Some might reduce it simply to the abstract, the idea of objects that are abstract, ideas themselves, the idea of the self being some form of an abstract, or its ideal in the form of Plato, or it will appeal to there being something that is right and wrong. And without that appeal to right and wrong, one is caught less capable, possibly or likely incapable, of making of resolving the moral consequences of evil in this world. Without a moral framework, one is more susceptible to PTSD, particularly the moral injury side, as an individual may refuse or suffer from living, or they may refuse something to be true and thus suffer living in a contradiction. One might ask, why is it so difficult for people to move on from the moral injury that they encounter in the world? And one part of that answer is that they have refused to acknowledge what they observe to be true because of the moral implications it bears on their conscience. If I am going to admit that what I saw was evil, then there must be something that is good, and there must be some source of what is good. Now, it can become very dangerous in this instance, particularly in the idolatry side, because if one does not appeal to some morality greater than themselves, maybe in a simplistic form, patriotism or pragmatism, or that which is right and true and good according to the author of that which is right and true and good, which would be God. The loss of life comes from that, the tragedy of loss of life comes from the thing destroyed was created in the image of God, and thus it must be tragic. I can understand the tragedy of it and the gravity of my actions because I understand the value of the thing that we are engaging with. I'll have to close on that. That's just a window. So the trap, I want to say the trap or the danger, the temptation that sneaks in at this point, where somebody has had to or has wrestled through the moral challenges of the situations that they've encountered in the world as it is, recognizing that all is not so sweet and good, that there are people out there, that the world itself can include bitterness, ugliness, anger, evil, destruction, is that ultimately all of those things are only an affront to you because you are holy. This is how the New Age ideology very quickly splits into nihilism, or even evolves furthest into idolatry, the idolatry of the self. I think if you were to take those three examples, again, we're going to use New Age, the New Age, or this Gnosticism at the top with nihilism at the side, and making a third point of a triangle being idolatry, that Gnosticism and idolatry share one common element, but that element is different than what idolatry and nihilism share. And then nihilism also shares a wing with Gnosticism, which is different than idolatry. We're using an example, a mental model of a triangle with 3 points that each point shares a common line with both sides, but it's not the same line as the other one. So the danger of encountering evil, the danger of approaching the consequences of living in this world with no framework, is that you will likely, or you can very quickly be enticed by these half-hearted solutions. New Age, Gnosticism, nihilism, there is no meaning. So not Gnosticism, it's a secret. We have to uncover the secret. It's a perpetual chase. It's sort of Gnosticism, in my best explanation, as in a form of relationship, is when somebody says, we can do the thing when you do the thing, and then they keep adding more to it. You can, I don't know what you want to have. You can have a beer when you finish your test, and then you finish the test, and like, okay, you have to finish another test, and you're like, what, I did the last one you said the last time, and then you're like, well, you can, and this goes on and on and on and on and on until you have you've surpassed it. I think that's that Gnosticism can be an infinite regress in that sense, or an infinite pulling. It's like a carrot without a stick, kind of, or you get it. It's like fishing. It's like you're constantly pulling somebody along. It's baiting you along. Nihilism is just a half-hearted solution, saying there is no meaning. Might also oftentimes come across in some sense as cowardice otherwise. And then finally, on that example, idolatry, which is the most tempting because it oftentimes, or most oftentimes, must result in the worshiping of the self, which itself is an affront to God. So where does this come in? How does this conclude? Why would we bring this up? Ultimately, if you are going to see darkness in the world, you must carry the light. That means there must be some source upon which that light is founded. You did not create the fire that you carry. You do not create the torch. You just carry it. You may not have even created the darkness, probably didn't. But when we encounter evil in this world, and if we want to be strong against it, if we want to claim that there is something right and true and good, or that we can justify addressing evil, then you must begin from a foundation that there is something right and true and good. There must be morality first before you can fight against or argue against the evil. If you are going to claim that something is evil, but you have no moral foundation, then you have opened yourself up to PTSD, particularly moral injury. Because how can you claim that what you experienced was wrong if there is no system by which morality can even be determined? Or more specifically, if there is no law, spiritual law greater than the creation of man, if there's greater than the creations of man, not the creation of man. Law, if there's no law or there are no rules to morality, then how can you claim that they have been broken, that you are thus victim? And so, if you're going to face against the darkness, you must seek after first what is true, that you have something to wield against it, not only because the light cuts through the darkness, but it sustains you through it. If you wish to fight against evil, if you wish to fight against the darkness, you must carry the light. This has been the Redacted Culture Cast. Thank you for listening. If you want to, please, you can head over to redactedllc.com and look at the events that we have coming up. Other than that, go forth and conquer.